So today's guest speaker, Mr. Thomas, and Thomas, you can give me a virtual back to the head smack, but Mr. Thomas Neudenberger, and correct me if I'm wrong when you come in there, he's the Chief Operating Officer for a company called Realtime. His bio is up online, but looking at this, very impressive with the support that he's provided over the 30+ years of being in the SAP and the IT service provider sector, supporting global markets, and commercial corporations, banks, government agencies, and the like. Numerous articles, and a member of many of affiliations, and does a lot of volunteer work himself. So most certainly an ideal candidate for today's presentation.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks for joining, everybody. I hope you brought your lunch and you will enjoy this presentation. As we have a little bit of a group, please take notes, and we will have plenty of time at the end for Q&A, and we can circle back to any of the slides to discuss what's really going on. As this presentation is educational, allow me to briefly talk about the company and the technology up front to help you understand who we are and how we got here to this point. The company Realtime, and as Larry said, I don't have personally 35 years of experience, but our company was founded in 1986, and I've been with them for almost 20 years, but I've been in IT for almost 30. The company Realtime was actually founded in 2002 specifically to promote the bioLock technology international, and the bioLock, which we will be talking about, was actually triggered by a customer in the food industry who found out that all their employees are sharing passwords and everybody was logging on with other IDs. So we developed the technology, and the technology was actually first certified by SAP March 1st, 2002, 18.5 years ago, and is still the only certified biometric technology that's deeply integrated inside SAP. We've done a lot of partnerships. We did a global partnership with Fujitsu once we integrated the Palm main scanner, and I've had the opportunity to present live in 5 continents with them. But let's talk about what triggered this development. Well, very simple. Without checking ID in SAP, you never know who the actual user is. You don't know who's logging on to SAP, who for sure don't know who's using that sensitive administrator profile. You don't know who shares a computer, who creates a purchase order, or in the government world, you don't know who moves any budgets to another division or who checks out sensitive equipment. And especially with people working from home due to COVID, it becomes more and more important that we really know who the person is. So first, it's important for us that we do understand what our risk is. And the risk is very simple. Data does not leak itself. So once we understand that risk, what is causing this risk? Well, what do you think? The human being, the one that's always the weakest link in our security, is a person. And it's always the people who leak the data, and we need to accept that risk to prevent it. Now, you might tell me, oh, I trust all my employees. We don't have that issue. Well, we do a lot of business in Africa. Guess why? In Africa, I do not have that discussion. I talked to the CIO. I said, people steal from you? They say, sure they do. In America, it's a little different. But the point is, the US Army has 500,000 troops. The US Navy has over 330,000 troops. Are we saying that they're all bad? No, we're not. We are saying it only takes one bad person to cause that tremendous amount of damages. So it only takes one bad apple. And this is just here to warm up, help to keep your honest employees honest. Just because you're going bowling with them doesn't mean you shouldn't monitor them. In Germany, we say, Vertrauen ist gut, Kontrolle ist besser. Trust is good, control is better. And this is something that, especially in the government, people should be very familiar with. Well, you familiar with this guy? Probably. He was the one person that caused damages. So I think you've guessed it right. It's Edward Snowden, that one person that was responsible for the biggest intelligence leak in all of NSE history. In fact, he just got permanent residency in Russia about 5 days ago. He's never coming back. So why we don't want to discuss the leak, we want to discuss what caused the leak and how this and other leaks can be prevented in the future. So what did Snowden do? He worked for Booz Allen Hamilton as a contractor. He wasn't even a government, really an employee. And he convinced over 20 of his coworkers that had high-level security clearance to hand over their password so he could do his job as an administrator. And yes, they did it. So that shows you the danger of the password alone. And the NSA did a lot of research about it, and they agreed that inadequate security measures at the NSA played the role for the worst data breach that they had. So let's talk about the overlooked and ignored security challenge in SAP. Well, very simple. People share passwords. Hackers hack credentials. Secretaries have passwords to all the executives. And we have thousands of SAP roles, and all the users are completely over-permitted. And last but not least, the home office, everybody is working from home now, but everybody agrees it's here to stay. So enforcing the security out of the home is becoming very difficult. So I think we can all agree people with bad intentions can easily take over other SAP user accounts, access your most sensitive data, and cause a lot of damage. By the way, passwords were invented back in 1963. And the inventor said back then, they're not secure. And people didn't even like them. It was a cumbersome solution. We're still using them. So let's talk about the solution. For some here, the 16-foot metal fence might seem like a great protection. But will it stop an 18-wheeler? Probably not. After 9/11, we saw a lot of additional security getting up, especially in Washington, D.C. But really, if we compare this metal fence to SAP security, it is time to add an additional layer of security on top of the SAP security. And if we look on the right-hand side, this is just to make you understand the concept of bioLock. You all have been in a hotel room, and you know that everybody in the hotel has access to your room. So what do you do when you go to bed at night? You close that swinging door bar, that additional security checkpoint, and it overwrites the security from the entire staff, and nobody can come in your room anymore. And that is really what our technology allows SAP users to do, is to set unlimited re-authentication checkpoints, aka a swinging door bar, anywhere in SAP. Well, how do we re-authenticate that swinging door bar in SAP? Historically, we started with fingerprint. We can use any kind of laptop or USB device and simply put a finger on the sensor. We integrated with Fujitsu Palm Vein, a different kind of technology. You hold your hand over the scanner. It's sometimes a little better accepted since people often identify fingerprint with law enforcement, which it has nothing to do in our scenario. But the Palm Vein is pretty cool, and even better now that we have COVID, because people don't have to touch anything. We also integrated the NIMI band. The NIMI band is the ultimate biometric security for people who wear gloves. Again, due to COVID, we have a lot of hazmat suits. It's a band that you authenticate first that then communicates with NFC. But we've also integrated with the CAC card. And probably a lot of viewers here have a CAC card in their pocket, and they're used to sticking it in a reader. And as long as it's in the reader, you have access. But in combination with the fingerprint or other authentication methods, it's becoming a very powerful tool. We have also integrated with Windows 10, which is Windows' own authentication mechanism. So anything from a $15 fingerprint sensor to a smile and a Logitech camera could authenticate your outgoing wire transfer in SAP. And since we have some government folks here on the line, you're probably familiar with ITAR, International Travel and Arms Regulations. If you have data in SAP that are covered by ITAR, you should ensure that only Americans can access those data and only while they are on US soil. How do you do that? We do it very simple. We lock down the access to the drawing with our bioLock security checkpoint. And on top of the SAP rules, the fingerprint, we also we request that the nationality is checked and it has to be an American that's accessing the data. And then we could also check the IP address and say if the request doesn't come from Washington, D.C., the person will not get access to that sensitive drawing that is ITAR protected. Now, a lot of companies have access control or EIM or Active Directory or some kind of activities already going on. So allow me to explain the difference to our technology by the example of the Heathrow International Airport. We all know the security checkpoint where we need to show our ID before we go in the secure area. Allow me to compare this to the SAP Logon. Everything that other technologies do are outside the secure area or before the SAP Logon. Everything that we do is inside the secure area or after the SAP Logon. We lock down the terminals, we lock down the access to the planes, and we even lock down the cockpit if necessary. So the granular controls inside the system. The reason I'm bringing this up is we generally complement and play very nice with all other activities because we are playing on a totally different level. Let's stay with that same example, the airport security. What does the officers do? He will check Larry's ID and compare and say, yes, this is Larry that wants to have access to my secure area. But then he does something else. He will put the ID on that little scanner and check if Larry is on a no-fly list or on a security watch group or perhaps on a TSA pre-check. And after that, he will make the determination if Larry is denied or if Larry has easy access to the line where he doesn't have to take his shoes off. And this is exactly what bioLock does in the SAP system. We check ID for any checkpoint and then have extra authorizations where we have allow list and deny list to make sure that only the authorized person gets in. So what do we mean by 100% ID check? We started with the logon protection. So that's very good for preventing password sharing, fast user switching. But the value of the technology is the function protection. Protect your transactions, the info types, the tables, the buttons, values, anything in SAP, and lock it down for the SAP power users so no unauthorized people will get access. But we can also use ID check for all other employees that might not even know that SAP exists because they use it for employee self-service, they use it for time and attendance, they use it for medical checkup. We use it for equipment checkout to prove that we gave this weapon to that person or that we gave a hard hat to the person. So if they get injured, they can't sue the company. We use it a lot also for SAP digital signature. And in addition, we can use it for customer verification. We can identify bank customers, university students, so they don't cheat. We even have a cardless point of sale system where retail customers can go shopping and they pay right via the SAP system without even bringing their wallet. And then, of course, for medical patients, it's important so we do the right operation for the right person. But One of our favorite case studies is Social Security beneficiaries, NSSA in Zimbabwe, and I will talk about this a little bit more in detail later. But let's go back to the beginning, the logon protection. Why is it so important to protect our logon? Well, people do shoulder surfing. They simply look over your shoulder and they see the password that's being typed in. People write down passwords, we all know that, and hackers do nothing else than use password sniffers or keylogging software, or any modern computer can hack at any 8-digit passwords in less than 8 business hours. And let's face it, you have the CAC card that's in the reader or it's stuck somewhere in your laptop, and as long as you don't take it out, the machine is logged on, so that doesn't help. And in addition to that, we know that once you hit the backspace and your logon field, SAP stores everything. So if you accidentally type the password in the user field, well, guess what? It is stored. So you match it against one of the users and you get in. We've done it at many customers and it works at least 50% of the time. So once the bioLock is installed, the only difference is a little window will pop up and say, put your finger on the sensor, hold your hand on the scanner, tap your NIMI device on the reader, whatever the Re-Authentication checkpoint is. And now we have the secure identification through two-factor authentication when logging onto SAP. This becomes even more important. A lot of companies these days lose single sign-on. So as long as you signed onto your computer in the morning, you just click on any of the sensitive SAP systems and you go right in. While this is very convenient, it's definitely not secure. But let's talk about SAP transactions. Every main menu in SAP, there are tens of thousands of them, are called SAP transactions. And we have hundreds of them identified that our customers have deemed sensitive over the years. Everything from creating a vendor to moving goods, executing payment, to a relatively new transaction. BP maintained a business partner where they merged 30 sensitive transactions into one. So you can imagine a bad guy getting access to BP has now access to a lot of really cool stuff. But it doesn't stop at the transactions. The transactions can easily be configured, but there are HR info type. There are also tens of thousands of tables in SAP that we can individually protect. There are values that we can protect. The oldest central bank in the world has been using the technology for over 10 years. And if it transfers under 10,000 euros, they don't care. But if it exceeds a predefined amount, then the biometric authentication is required. And of course, we want to have the capability to put the checkpoint into an execution or enter button so we know when a function is executed, not when a function is accessed. But as a takeaway, we can check ID for any function or any mouse click in the SAP system. And another great feature is masking fields, which is a requirement that we see a lot in the government. Unfortunately, this here is an HR example where we show how the HR data, the PII, the personal identifiable information, are hidden in the first screen. So anybody can put, when requested or when accessing the screen, they provide the biometric credential and they don't even have to be enrolled. It will default back to a screen where the data is masked or hidden. But when the right credential for the invited user is presented, the PII is being displayed. And we have done this a lot in a PM notification where we hide the functional location and the functional equipment and the info field, as that is sensitive data for many users. So that could have stopped our friend Snowden from seeing the sensitive data. But what actually could have stopped him from exporting them and leaking them to the rest of the world? Very simple. In SAP, we said we can pull up any of the 10,000 tables as long as we have access to it with some kind of a sensitive transaction. And once the table is there, we go to list, save local file, we type in what we want to do. And as long as the smart card is in the reader and we click the generate button, the data is being exported. Now, in our demo, we put that our checkpoint right into the generate button. So the biometric ID check will hopefully stop the Snowden, since he would not have had the ID and is enrolled in the system. And I would like to show this to you real quick. We've actually developed an online simulation system. We've been asked so many times for people if they could try it. And while we're very open to do pilot installations with seriously interested customers, we wanted to allow the masses to be able to really play around with it. So we developed this online simulation software, and we can go in here, and once we click on preventing accessing to the tables, you see here we have a table pulled up, and we go to list local file, and we click on the local file. And as soon as I hit the generate button, I am being stopped. The window pops up, our security checkpoint is triggered, and it says, wait a minute, who are you? So I will first pretend that I hold my hand over the scanner, and I wasn't identified. Well, because Snowden didn't have a biometric credential enrolled, the access to the file was denied. As opposed to, if I do the same again, I click the generate button, and now the right person holds the hand over the scanner, and the data is being exported. And you see here how the identified user was Smith. So extremely valuable. I will share this presentation so you can play around with this, but I'll go back to the presentation here and continue. And we will see how we can basically configure everything in the system. These are just some screenshots of the bioLock technology. And the reason I'm showing this is to make it very clear for people that have some kind of an SAP background that this is not a simple logon software. We have 24 of very detailed menus that allow you to configure and change and do everything that you can potentially expect from a major security software. I also want to show how easy it is to protect the transaction, because in SAP, normally everything takes weeks and months. Not with this technology. If I wanted to protect an outgoing payment transaction, I go into our configuration tables, and in the first table, I will define a random function number. In this example, 470, could be 999. And I say, I want to protect an outgoing payment transaction, F1110. And now I select my inspection feature. Do I want finger scan? Do I want finger and cat card? Do I want the palm vein? Do I want a NIMI band? I have all kinds of options, and we are adding other options along as customers request it. And then I want to set the global check mark to the right so it's protected for everybody in the system. And then we even go one step further and we invite the defined. And I explain this here in step 3. So the next step is we go into the next table and we simply assign the transaction F1110 to the function 470. And now the transaction F1110 is protected. Now, as a third step, because right now everybody with SAP authorization and with authorization, but we would like to narrow it further down. So I go into the third step and I define that that function 470 can only be executed by Smith and by Stephen. And now for the first time, I can guarantee the CEO that Stephen and Smith are the only 2 people in the world that can do an outgoing wire transfer here or payment. But let's take it a step further. This was the access to the F1110. What happens if we actually want to execute and run that payment? Well, very simple. We go back to the first table and define a function number 471. Very likely the same buttons will be selected. But now another programmer will put our security checkpoint, which is a simple piece of code in a field exit or user exit, right into the enter button or the screen checkpoint to the 4-7 controls and the button. It really is that simple. Now, what do we do? How can we use this for existing problems that you guys might have? By now, you all should be familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, known as SOX. A lot of companies had to ramp up GRC. Many people had never even heard about it before. And one big part is the segregation of duties. Thomas here, the employee number one, shouldn't be able to create a purchase order, approve it, and then issue a payment. That's why GRC will ensure that the user profiles, only Thomas can create it, Werner can go ahead and issue it, and now our third employee, Bongani, approves the payment. Well, in the security world, we know I like nothing more than looking over Werner's shoulder when he does his work, so I can log on as Werner and approve the purchase order, and then I'll find a way to log in as Bongani to pay for it. And if it ever blows up, well, it can never be traced back to me. And that's actually what's happening. And we have a great way of reinforcing that with biometrics. Another thing that we do a lot in Africa is we are reducing corruption and collusion with dual controls. Because very simple, there are people can do one biometric identification, but if they're the actual authorized user, they could still transfer $1 million to the Grand Cayman Islands. So we establish our dual controls, and now Thomas Smith has to request a transfer and ask April to reconfirm. So really, we have two keys that fired a nuclear missile, how we remember it from the Cold War movies. So one fun fact here, the two keys to the missile from the old movies, that was actually not true. There was a system in place called PAL, and they put it in place so only the president could fire those missiles. But we probably all read the news back a couple years ago, and think 2013 or 14, that all of them over 20 years were 8 zeros. And that's really a great example how a high security means less convenience. So in many cases, the less convenience is chosen, and it really jeopardizes what we are doing. But not with biometrics. We can increase the security and the convenience at the same time. And in this example, I don't know how many of you are familiar with SAP Digital Signature. We see it in a lot of industries right now due to COVID. In pharma, it's just going crazy. They need to approve everywhere. And their problem is that it takes 10 to 15 seconds to do it. With the biometrics, we can bring it down to 1 second, and the users really love it. So it's increased security and it's increased convenience. That's why we actually put the NIMI band in place, because a lot of these users wear gloves and it helps them tremendously. So let's look about what happens when a protected function is triggered. Just to show you a little bit from the technology where it sits, the user requests the function, and the request goes into the bioLock that has its own namespace inside SAP, and that is where we check the ID. So now the reference template, which is, again, in tables in bioLock, hidden in SAP, go back. They're being compared on the front end, and assuming the right match comes back and we confirm that it's actually Larry who put the hand on the scanner, then it will be checked if Larry is on the allow list for that specific function, completely independent from the over-permitted SAP rules. And then the activity is allowed or the activity is denied. And then, of course, everything will be recorded in the log file for clear accountability. And we could even trigger an instant email notification to the security team to make sure that somebody taps on Larry's shoulder while he's still sitting at his PC trying to do this sensitive task here. Another great thing to mention is that there is no required for an end user. Because what do? They type in the F1110 and the transaction is being triggered. And the only difference is that the security checkpoint pops up and says, put your hand on the scanner, put your finger on the sensor, present the NIMI band to the NFC reader. And from there, it goes right back to where they were before. Unless, of course, something goes wrong, the person is not permitted. But if that is the case, then we should be talking to the supervisor anyway and see what happened here. Was it a technical challenge from the setup, or did the person try to do something? Now, this is, in my opinion, the most important slide. The clear difference offered by the Granular ID check. Without the biometric technology, who has access to all kinds of sensitive functions right now? Well, we already said colleagues share passwords, and we hear it all the time to go like, yeah, one guy goes on vacation, he gives his password purposely to his colleagues so he can keep working on his stuff while he's gone. We have all the secretaries that have passwords to multiple executives. All the executives have high-level, all kinds of authorizations, well, because they're the executives. And then we have SAP consultants. They all come in, they get roles assigned, so they do their job. Nobody really thinks about it. Then we have the hackers. They do nothing else than taking over profiles. We have Snowden. We already established he likes to get passwords from his co-workers. But then we also, due to COVID, we're all working from home these days. And we already established that's not going to change anytime soon. So the user pops up the laptop in the kitchen, logs onto the corporate finance system, and now everybody that walks into the kitchen suddenly has access to the corporate finance system. But then the admin or DDIC, which is the god of the administrators, they have access to everything. And every organization is scared by it. So long story short, once the biometrics is invoked on the function level for the first time, all these other guys are out. We can guarantee that Thomas Smith and Steve are the only people in the world that will access the protected function. So just like when you come to a party at the White House, unless you're specifically invited, you will always be rejected. So we are using biometrics as an additional SAP policy enforcer for attribute-based access control, which a lot of people start talking about, and we've been really doing it for 20 years. So let's see here how the bioLock logs things in the log file. We have a very comprehensive log file that we're only showing a small fraction of the fields, and every customer requests that the custom fields are being added to this. But the most important thing to point out here is that we can actually see the actual user. Right now, you only see the SAP user in your log file. If you even have the SAP user, the SAP log file activated, we see the biometric user. We see the first name, we see the last name, and we can clearly see here how logged on as Smith and was accepted executing the payment. This is how it should be, and in the best case scenario, you should only see the green was accepted in here. But for the presentation, while Mr. Smith went and got his coffee, John hopped on his unlocked computer and he tried to execute the payment. He was even stupid enough to provide the biometric credential when requested, but he was still not able to do the outgoing transfer. And this is exactly the case where the email should go out to the entire security team here. and say, hey, John is on Mr. Smith's computer right now trying to execute a payment. We prevented it, but you should take a closer look at it. In fact, we have built for government organizations honeypots where people were actually able to use different fingers. And if they were under duress, they could put a different finger on it, would lead them to a honeypot. It would trigger an instant fraud alert to the highest level of security people, and the person could be rescued. So some really cool stuff there. But to continue with the log file, you see how Amanda Jones logged in as Jones, and she's still not authorized. Can you guess why? Well, she wasn't on the allow list. So even her SAP roles allowed her access. The bioLock did not, and she was rejected. And the same applies to the last two cases here. The second last one here, Matthias, this was actually a hacker. He tried to come in, take over Matthias' profile. Normally, he would have had access to everything, but he was immediately rejected by the metric checkpoint because he didn't even have a device plugged in. So there was an immediate out. And then the last one, our friend Bongani logged in as DDIC, the god of the administrators, still not able to execute a payment run because, again, Bongani wasn't specifically whitelisted to execute that transaction. Now, two case studies here that I wanted to highlight before we look at some other ones if we have time. The employee identification in SAP, we have built a lot of kiosks. We put fingerprint sensors or palm vein scanners into kiosks. We do it for time and attendance. There is a great case study and even a great video from Transnet, a large transportation agency in Africa, using the kiosk for plant maintenance. And I can see this a lot in the US government, Navy shipyards, for example, where they check out something, they go into SAP, they hold their hand over the scanner, and they have really good accountability of what is going on in the warehouse or in the production hall. But you can apply this to pretty much anywhere where SAP is used by even people that don't know that SAP exists. The other one to the right is the NSSA, the National Social Security Administration of Zimbabwe. They originally purchased the bioLock to control their clerks, the people that hand out the benefits, because they wanted to control that not all the money goes to friends and family. But we later found out that it was the beneficiaries that cheated by knocking their brother over the head and stealing their very cumbersome ID to go into the office and collect benefits and then go over to the next office and collect the benefits again. So we started enrolling cards that you see there on the top. And those cards were enrolled with the fingerprint for every beneficiary. And now the beneficiary has to come to the office, stick the card in the reader. In addition, they have to put the finger on the sensor before the record will even open and be able by the clerk to be accessed. And with that, cut down tremendously on the fraud activities. But even when we enrolled, thousands of people did not come for enrollment, and they quickly found out that these people were long dead, and they have been paying them for many. So our case, but I think we're running a little bit short of time. So allow us to share this presentation after the session, and you can click on any case study. It will open up. You can download all of them as a zip file and look through them and see what just a small example of successful projects that we have run really around the world. So to finish this up here, let me summarize how the Snowden data breach could have been prevented. Well, very simple. Check IDs for employees, set unlimited security checkpoints, protect your transaction, and only allow access after a confirmed ID check. That is a very simple way of making sure that something like the Snowden breach will never, ever happen again. So please consider sharing the knowledge with other SAP teams. I would encourage them to set up a presentation for their individual teams. And as I said at the beginning, we offer pilot programs, so the teams can actually play with it in their own SAP sandbox. So in addition to the PDF files that I showed on the previous screen, in the presentation, you can also see we have a lot of videos, we have multiple channels, we have the online simulation. So there are a lot of resources for you to play around and have fun if you're interested in learning a little bit more about it. But with this, I would like to open this up for questions. Hopefully, we're able to take some notes, and we'll take it from here.
Thomas, thank you so very much. I'm going to chime in here real quick, and I'm going to turn it over to Steve because I'm going to have to bounce and roll over to a 1300 meeting. Steve's going to go in and look at the chat room, see if there's any questions, and let you unmute your microphone, ask your question of Thomas. Phenomenal presentation. Again, I really did enjoy, how you put that in a story fashion. Very knowledgeable, very thorough, and in a manner, that kept my attention during the whole thing. So, as we would say in the military, a bravo Zulu, or a kudos to you again for this presentation.